global anti-Semitism and how we contend with global anti-Semitism. This is our next session. I'm very honored to call to the stage Yisrael Aumann. Professor Aumann is a Nobel Prize Laureate in Economic Sciences. He's also a Professor Emeritus at Hebrew University. Please, Professor Aumann.
I'm honored to invite to the stage Professor Irwin Cotler, Canada's Special Envoy on Preserving Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism, former Minister of Justice in Canada. This panel will be hosted by Joey Lowe. Joey is the founder of Israel at Heart and Star Farm Ventures.
And now, I also like to call upon myself to join the session, but just a moment before we begin, 30 seconds of just a little promotion.
Thank you very much for those of you who are here. And obviously, this is a very important topic today in the world in which we live, and it seems, consistently getting worse. And it's something that the panelists here, I think, will each have something to add. Okay, so Professor, could I start with you to ask you what is the reason, in your opinion, that there is so much anti-Semitism?
What's the reason?
Yes, the cause, that what you would say.
Okay. So, this session is about fighting anti-Semitism.
Yes.
And you're asking a good question, because in order to fight something, you have to realize what makes it. In order to prevent war or to get peace, you have to find out why people fight each other. And in order to cure a disease, you have to find out what makes the disease, why people get ill in the first place. So your question is a good question. These lights make me... Can we turn off the lights here? I can't see anything. All right, let's see. So... I think there are basically two reasons for anti-Semitism, and I don't like to say this myself as a Jew, but there was one goy who said it, yes.
Yes.
And his name is Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens, and he said that the people hate the Jews because the Jews are too smart for them, okay? And they drive everybody else out of business. And so during the Middle Ages, there were laws made that prevented the Jews from doing handiwork or farming or lawyers or doctors or so on and so forth. And nevertheless, the Jews succeeded in surviving and even in becoming quite prosperous. And people hate them for that, for the competition that they make. Jews are simply too smart and too capable, or not only smart but also capable of other things. And that's one reason. And the other reason is that the Jews stick together. yes, they form an entity. Let me tell you a story, Joey. Okay, I was in France many years ago, maybe 30, 40 years ago. I was at a conference in Paris, and on Sunday, I wanted to. On Monday, I was scheduled to go home, so I was there on Shabbos. The conference was on Thursday and Friday, something like that. And my plane was on Monday, and on Sunday, I decided I want to get something for my wife to bring home. And so my host said, everything is closed on Sundays. But I do remember one street where they have wholesale dealers in clothing, and we can go there and we can try to get something. And we went to store after store, and they all said we only sell wholesale. Finally, we came to a store, and he also said we only sell wholesale. I'm terribly sorry, we can't serve you. So my host said, but this gentleman is flying away tomorrow morning, and we have to get the stuff for him today. So he said, oh, where is he flying? So my host said, to Israel. He said, oh, Israel. And he turns to me and he says, I don't know whether any of you will understand this. Is that a Yid? Are you Jewish? Yes. So I said, yeah. And he exchanges a few words with me in Yiddish to make sure that I'm not lying, yeah. And then he sells me a beautiful skirt for even at a discount from the wholesale price. Okay, Jews stick together, and I think they form an entity. They're a separate people. Wherever they are, they become separate. Of course, you have people who leave the collective, who leave the community, but then they leave, and then they are not subject to anti-Semitism. Okay, in 2 or 3 generations. Hitler needed 3 generations, but
Keep the microphone too.
okay. So I think those 2 reasons that Jews are really capable, capable people, and that they form a group, an entity, they stick together. That is what causes anti-Semitism. And I don't want to fight that. Yes, I think those. I think I'd rather keep those things and not leave go of them. Yes, I don't want to be incapable, and I don't want to be, and I don't want the Jews to lose their identity.
Irwin, what would you say to Professor Aumann in terms of what's your explanation? Because I'm not so sure it's the same.
Well, I think that Professor Aumann reflected some of the tropes, but my own sense is that anti-Semitism is not only the oldest, longest, most enduring, most toxic and lethal of hatreds, one which mutates and metastasizes over time, but it's anchored in one foundational, historical, generic, conspiratorial trope, which gives birth to all the other tropes. That is, the Jews as the enemy of all that is good and the embodiment of all that is evil, reflecting whatever is the zeitgeist or canon at any particular moment in time. So when the zeitgeist was religion or the Christian religion, so the Jews were guilty of a deicide. In today's contemporary terms, a great replacement theory. When it was the Black Plague, the Jews were the poisoners of the wells. Today, the Jews, the Jewish people, Israel, responsible for manufacturing the COVID-19 virus, causing its spread, and yet in another trope, profiting from it. When the canon was race, then the Jews were non-Aryans. When the canon was anti-racism, the Jews were white supremacists. And then in the 70s, when human rights emerged as the new secular religion of our time, something I celebrated at the time as a law professor and human rights lawyer, that's when the Jewish people and Israel as a Jew among the nations emerged as the major human rights violator, the new geopolitical, if you will, antichrist of our time. And so if I had to sum it up and using a human rights lens, I would just say that traditional anti-Semitism is discrimination against, assault upon, denial of the rights of Jews to live as equal members in any society they inhabit. The new anti-Semitism is a discrimination against, denial of, assault upon the rights of the Jewish people, Israel as a Jew among the nations, to live as an equal member of the family of nations. What is common to both forms of anti-Semitism, traditional and new, is discrimination. All that has happened is moved from discrimination against Jews as individuals to discrimination against Jews as a people, reverberating back against Jews as individuals, and that's the contemporary manifestation of this historical process.
But what's the reason for it? Why? This is what Mark Twain asked. What's the reason for it? Why did this happen? Why do people always find reasons to hate Jews? Yes. Why?
Because in any particular, as I said, moment in time, one needed to stigmatize, scapegoat, hold one people, entity, etc., for responsible for the ills of society, which bred a whole series of tropes so the Jews control the media, etc., etc. But the generic trope is, as I said, the Jews is the enemy of all that is good, the embodiment of all that is evil. That breathes into those tropes that you mentioned and others as well.
It doesn't explain anti-Semitism. It describes anti-Semitism. It describes that these people have always, throughout the centuries, it's always been the Jews. Why? Yeah,
But why do we need a
what is the
reason,
for it?
Professor Aumann? Why do we need a reason? Why do we need to know why there is anti-Semitism? There is anti-Semitism.
Yes, yes.
Why we need to know what's the reason for anti-Semitism?
Why is what?
You always asking him, you're asking Professor Irwin,
Yes.
like, but why the reason? What is the reason that people hate us?
Yes, what is the reason that people hate us?
Why it's important for you to know?
Because I said that at the beginning. Right. It's important for me to know, because if I want to cure it, if I want to stop it, I have to find out what makes it happen. If I want to cure a disease, I have to find out about germs. If I want to cure cancer, right, I have to investigate cancerous cells. If I want to make peace, I have to find out what makes people go to war. I have to find the reason for it. I cannot fight it unless I understand it, okay? And in this...
Well, what I wanted to say is Roni and I know each other for about 20 years. So Roni came on a trip to the United States. 9 Ethiopian law students came to the States, and Roni was in a group of 3 students who were in Atlanta. And for 2 weeks, she spent her time speaking in black historic colleges, at churches where Dr. King had preached. And at the end of the 2 weeks, these 9 students learned a lot about America and about, as black people in Israel, Ethiopian Israelis, relating towards black Americans. And so I'd like to ask Roni, because that's in terms of how to fight it, how to at least, put up some kind of attempt to stop it, and to some degree. Could you explain what did you learn from your trip? And a couple of weeks ago, Roni wrote an article for the newspaper after Kanye West and Kyrie Irving got into the whole issue of anti-Semitism, and you wrote a very important piece about that. So why don't you give your idea in terms of what that did for you?
I think the main thing I learned in this delegation was that we have to talk to everybody. And it doesn't matter what we think the person in front of us think about us. That's why I'm insisting with Professor Aumann to understand why it's very important for him to know why they hate us. Because for me, it doesn't matter. If they hate us because we are smart, if they hate the Jew because they're smart, you cannot change your smartness. You cannot stop being smart. We need to find a way to fight it without if we don't know the reason for that. It's like I'm a black woman Ethiopian, Jew, Israeli. I have so many identities in this person, so many identities. I can wake up every morning and fight to everybody. Because everybody can discriminate me, think they're better than me, because I'm a woman, or because I'm black, or because I'm Jew, or because I'm an Israeli. They can find a reason to each part of my identity. But I prefer to wake up every morning and to think about the good people I meet all over Israel and all over the world. And I think that that's the main thing that we as a Jew and as Israeli need to understand, that we cannot focus all the time on the negative part. We need also to look at the good parts and the positive parts. And there are countries, there are anti-Semitism all over the world, anti-Semitism, but there are also other parts of the world that respect the Jew and love the Jew and want to cooperate with the Jew. Look at Israel. It's a very successful country, and we're not a successful country because we are only working with ourselves. We're doing a lot of cooperation abroad, and I think we need to maintain this part of our way of looking at the world. That's my
Irwin,
point of view.
You're in Canada. You were put in charge of fighting anti-Semitism. What have you learned from your experience on the job that could be insightful to people who are trying to combat anti-Semitism?
So some of the principal findings, and my responsibility was not only domestic anti-Semitism in Canada, a mandate which is global anti-Semitism. Principal findings were as follows. Number one, that we are experiencing the highest level of anti-Semitic incidences since audits of anti-Semitism began in the late 70s. You found this in the recent report of the Anti-Defamation League in the US, same thing in Canada, etc. That's number one. Number two, not only did you find increases in anti-Semitic assaults, vandalism, harassment, but we found a dramatic increase in anti-Semitic beliefs, in the number of beliefs by Americans, for example, in one or more or even a half a dozen of 11 anti-Semitic tropes that have been defined. Number three, and this I found very concerning, is that the conventional paradigm of either identifying or combating anti-Semitism was that you had to combat anti-Semitism from the far right and the far left and radical Islam. The most disturbing finding that I found was the increasing mainstreaming, normalizing, legitimation of anti-Semitism in the political culture, the popular culture, the entertainment culture, the sports culture, and in particular in the campus culture. The fourth thing was what I would call the marginalization of the combating of anti-Semitism in the overall unnecessary combating of hate, systemic racism, and discrimination. For example, I found in the Canadian government, different departments and agencies, they spoke against and sought to combat rightly discrimination against Indigenous people, blacks and people of color, Asian Canadians, Muslims, and the like, but anti-Semitism was somehow erased in the calls to action by the Privy Council, the highest level of the Canadian government. All these other targeted groups were part of an action plan. There was no reference at all to anti-Semitism. I believe we've tried to remedy that, but that was a problem. The fifth thing, which I found very troubling, was the laundering of anti-Semitism under the very cover of anti-racism itself. We held a national summit to combat anti-Semitism in Canada, July 2021, the first of its kind of any country. And the two shared experiences of the diversity of the Canadian Jewish community, sharing their experiences, and this relates as well to yourself, Ryan, one of the things you mentioned. One was a student who described himself as being a left-wing student. As he said, I'm a progressive student, but I'm being marginalized, stereotyped, excluded from the campus culture simply because of the fact that I'm being identified as a white, privileged, supremacist Jew who's also an apologist for the white apartheid state of Israel. And then came a black Jewish woman, an Ethiopian Jewish woman, who said, I'm being discriminated against because I'm Jewish, because I'm black, and because I'm a woman, but mostly even because I'm Jewish. And the Prime Minister at the end of that conference said those were the two most disturbing narratives of the experience of what it meant to be a target of anti-Semitism that he heard in the conference. I'll leave it there. There are about 5 other findings, but I think you get a sense of the manner in which our findings were both disturbing and therefore resulted in what I hope will be an effective national action plan to combat anti-Semitism.
Thank you. I want to ask you, Professor Aumann, I read today that when they asked you to explain game theory, you said the science of interaction between different entities that strive for different goals. Game theory has an underlying idea that incentives you want to make other people want to do what you want them to do. Yeah. So since you're the specialist in game theory, and if we would take anti-Semitism as a serious problem.
It is a serious problem.
Okay, so so how would we, using your expertise as a Nobel Prize winner, plus I also want to ask you, why do you think so many Nobel Prize winners are Jewish?
I explained it. Yes. Okay. Let me say another word about it.
Break up the mic. The mic.
Oh, okay. I always get this wrong. You can ask, what is it? Why are Jews more capable than the average? Okay. Nobel Prize winners. Okay, you asked about why are there so many Jewish Nobel Prize winners?
Yes.
So, and Mark Twain talks about that. But by the way, I'm quoting Mark Twain. This is a very, very good article that Mark Twain wrote in 1898. Yes, it's almost 150 years ago. And it is called Concerning the Jews, and I recommend to everybody in the audience to look that article up, and I'm going to quote from it right away. Look that article up and read it. It's in its entirety. It's easily findable on the internet. Mark Twain Concerning the Jews. But now we can ask, why is it that Jews are more capable? Well, Mark Twain has one answer, and that is that they were excluded from all kinds of professions, and so they had to sharpen their wits. And they were excluded because they were more capable. Yes, because they drove out all other people from the competition. But what in the first place made them more capable, somewhat more capable? Why did they win the competitions? Why were they excluded? And the answer to that is that the primary value of the Jew is study. Now, it happens to be Torah study, okay? We say every morning in our prayers, the study of Torah is equivalent to all the rest of Judaism combined. Yes, but Talmud Torah keneged kulam. That is for those of you who understand Hebrew. Talmud Torah keneged kulam. The study of the Torah is equivalent to all the other parts of Judaism combined. It's just as important, and that it has become the primary value of the Jewish people, and it morphed into intellectual activity in general. Okay, now when a rich man from any other society, when he wants to marry off his daughter to somebody, then he would go to another rich man and marry him off to the other rich man's son. In Judaism, it's not that way. The rich man goes to the head of the yeshiva in his town and says, "Who is your best student?" And he marries off his daughter to that student. And of course, that has genetic implications too, but I think the cultural implications are much more important than the genetic implications. It's study, intellectual activity, smartness, shrewdness, capability. That is what makes these things happen. Okay.
In a minute, first I want to go to Roni, but I want to ask also what makes so many human rights lawyers Jewish. You know, so you'll have your chance. But Roni, what would you say? Because we've talked about this a lot, and you know, we're interested at the end of the day of coming up with some suggestions or ideas that might not be what's being done today. So, what's one of the things that you would think is a way to combat some of the problem?
I think one of the suggestions is to do what you did. You did that 20 years ago. You talked about it a little bit about the initiative Israel at Heart, to take students from Israel to talk to, like I said, everybody, to go to churches, to universities, to classes, to everybody, and to make sure that people will listen and understand that is a big issue, the anti-Semitism, and we need to fight against it. And you talked about especially the Ethiopian community in Israel, that the Israeli government, I think, not smart enough to use them, and I think they need to use them more, because we bring in, not me as Roni, I'm talking about my community, we bring in something new to those people, especially to the black communities abroad. They can see, they can relate it to us, they can see us, we look the same, and we can talk to them, I think, differently, and we can explain, like we can bring different point of view about Israel. So that's, I think that's the main thing that the Israeli government's supposed to do. And one another thing that it's important for me, you mentioned before the Haaretz article that I wrote about Kanye West and Kyrie Irwin. I don't know how many of you knows, but there is a big debate in the United States about anti-Semitism against the Jew, of course, and they're talking about the new black Jewish in America. People saying that they are the true that they are the true Jew, and the white Jew stole their identity. It's a big debate, and Kanye West was part of it. So I wrote an article in Haaretz, and the article talked about how we can approach to those people and talk to them, and not to say Kanye West, okay, he's like has some problems, he doesn't know what he's saying, but he's influencing about millions of people. So we need to find the ways to talk to those people and to understand from where it's coming and how we can deal with this problem, because it's becoming a big problem in America.
So, Irwin, as a human rights lawyer who is defending all over the world political prisoners, is known for that. So, first, why is it that so many Jews find that as their calling? And then, second, to respond really to what Roni said, and something that we've been talking about for a long time is that if Israel was smart as a country, we say sometimes we're so smart and yet we're so stupid, because Ethiopian Israelis, I found over the last 20 years, they can be some of the best speakers for Israel. And if Israel would give them the opportunity, whether to be the ambassador to the United Nations representing Israel, that would teach the world something about Israel that very few people know.
I think one of the things I've noticed in terms of when I described about our principal findings re anti-Semitism was also a real ignorance about what being Jewish is all about. And I think part of what we have to do, and this relates to the Ethiopian Jewish issue, is to explain what Jewish identity is all about. In other words, the first thing is that the Jewish people are a prototypical indigenous people, a people that still inhabits the same land, embraces the same religion, studies the same indigenous Torah, speaks the same indigenous language, Hebrew, and bears the same indigenous name, Israel, as we did 3,500 years ago. That's one way of at least understanding the Jewish identity, the indigeneity of the Jewish people in its indigenous homeland. The second is that we are prototypical anti-colonialist people, a people that went from enslavement, etc., etc. Jewish history. But I think it only begins in a kind of misrepresented way of the Jews as the white colonial oppressors, etc. And the third thing, this relates very much to what Roni said, is that the Jewish people are a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilingual. The diversity of Jewish identity and Jewish experience has to be affirmed. And therefore, if we had more Ethiopian Jews in public diplomacy, that would help reflect and represent the nature of this diverse indigenous identity.
I agree. And just one more thing then is today it's very popular to call anybody who says something, you're an anti-Semite. Elon Musk the other day was called an anti-Semite. He said, no, I'm a pro-Semite. He was arguing, and yet so many people get out and by labeling people anti-Semitic so quickly without, as Roni says, entering into some kind of discussion with them and trying to understand what they are saying and do we understand it correctly, I think we're creating a much bigger problem. So many of the organizations whose job is to fight anti-Semitism, in my opinion, actually cause more anti-Semitism. Professor, you can say
I
something.
wanted to talk about something. I see there's about 57 seconds left. I just wanted to...
But you won the Nobel Prize, so you can take 2 minutes more, okay?
To conclude with the conclusion of Mark Twain, yes. The Jew has made a marvelous fight in this world and has done it with his hands tied behind him. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, and the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they're gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held the torch for a time, but it burnt out, and they sit in twilight now. The Jews saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains.
No. So what did Mark Twain say when they asked him right after Herzl made his speech in Basel about having a state? They asked him what would happen if all the Jews moved to that Jewish state. Do you remember what he said in the end? He said it would be very, very bad because they would be so much better than everyone around them. That's how he ended the 20 pages. But when I asked Professor Aumann if he would be on this panel, he said, you have to read Concerning the Jews. So I went home and I read it 10 times, and it is well worth reading. And I bought many copies and gave it out to friends. But it should be required reading, I think. I can't believe that I didn't hear about that until you brought it up to me, because he points out so clearly what are the explanations. With my mom, who's 97, I read it to her the other day. No, and it's so clear. So thank you all very much for participating. This is just a... Yeah.